So what happens next? Well, concretely, a few things here. We have, thanks to Yuri, got, I think, almost all of the presentations posted. I think there were a few, Jennifer Parker, for example, who didn't use any slides, so there's nothing to post up there. But Yuri's been very assiduous about getting stuff uploaded. And if you go to the Urban Systems Collaborative webpage for this conference, you'll find now that in the agenda table, those are now all converted into links, and you can see this. And I think we might even put this stuff up as well. I will get an email out in the next few days to everybody who registered. We had, I need to ask Susan, but I think we probably had around 110, 120 people register. Probably 70 or 80 of those people actually showed up, which counts for when you see so many unused badges outside, which is fairly typical of a conference. And I'd like to get some assessment of what you thought about the content, the structure, what we actually achieved, the venue, facilities, services, all those good kinds of things. So when the next time we plan one of these, one of my concerns in any case is always we come into, I had never been to the International House in Berkeley before. You come in here to do a gig and you no idea how it's going to work, but thanks to Susan Cass in particular and Nicholas for all their prep work, and then the video crew and the food service, I think has always been great. If you have not already sort of joined the Urban Systems Collaborative, it isn't a very formal process. All you have to do is get your name on this Google mailing list, and you're as much of a member as we count. That means you'll get any kinds of emails and notifications that we send out. We do have, we've just restarted our webinar series, so every other Friday, it's at 12:30 Eastern Time. There is a talk. Jerry, Jerry, did you speak last Friday? No, it was one of your colleagues, I think. Yes, right. So two members of FAIR and Peers spoke last Friday on transportation, as you'd imagine. And of course, we would welcome volunteers to give talks on that. I forget how far ahead we're booked at the moment, but you know, this thing stretches out. We take a break over the summer, it seems. And then I think we mentioned already this idea that the workshop, the two workshops that have taken place this morning, you know, there's a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts, a lot of experiences, stories that were brought out there that would be good material for the blog. Again, if you look on our website, there is a page, and our webmaster, Laxmi, is pretty good about posting material there, and I'm not as good about writing. I try to do an article every week, but it doesn't always work. But I think you're both the audience and the speakers in this community, and I think you certainly have thoughts that we could usefully put into that. And then the last thing I wanted to come to is this idea of a book. So, and I'd really like to get some thoughts on this. I think I mentioned yesterday in closing that it seems to me that there is something is changing here. The world is changing under the influence of our abilities now to capture, manipulate, and exploit information much more flexibly than we have been able to do in the past. That has some impact on the way that cities operate. That's what we've been talking about this morning. How are we going to train people to develop those kinds of skills? I think, don't see Otto in the room, but I remember, who's been a fantastic contributor, and I'm really pleased that we were able to get him to come. At one point, I think in the operations team discussions, I think it was he who observed, it was either he or it was Beatrice, one of them observed that there are some problems in this space that will only be solved when a certain generation retires. But that means that the new generation presumably has a different set of skills and different set of expectations. And how are those going to be generated? How does that feed into an education track? I see a number of universities around the world investing, because the reason I see them is they all come to IBM looking for funding, but investing in smarter cities programs. And this isn't exactly the same thing as smarter cities. It's kind of related, but it has a broader dimension in exploiting information. So I know these programs are coming along, but when you ask them, so what curriculum have you developed, or what textbooks are you going to use, I usually get stories about, well, we plan to do something like that. And I think that means there is a space in here for people who are skilled in the arts to put a textbook together. With this point of view, which is really how we organize this conference, that it's not about the technology. There are certainly interesting features going on there. It's about how can we make the technology useful and valuable and effective to urban administrators and agency leaders. So this is, I confess, I've probably not spent more than 15 minutes thinking about what you can see up there on the slide, but my thought is, for some kind of structure like this, so each of the second level bullets on here, in my mind here, represents a chapter. So starting off with, on the other hand, this book is not about educating people to be computer scientists, but we need to start with some sort of context around information and how it has impacted other areas of human activity, and give some stories there about the transformational impacts that it has had in other areas. Some thoughts about, that certainly have come up here, about so in an urban context, where does information come from? What shape and form does it come in? And what can you actually do with it? How can you exploit it? This area of, we like to call systems of systems, that has come up, and it was clear that Jane Jacobs, although she didn't use the phrase, understood the slippery nature of systems of systems. And then we've seen in the last couple of days here, there are a lot of issues in here. There are some technical issues about semantics and data formats and nasty things like that, but some deeper issues around things like privacy as well. And then the bulk of the book I would see as sets of examples across the domains of application, many of which we have touched on to some degree here, and actually there's probably many more I haven't listed. And this is where I think this group can add the greatest value, that many of you come from an academic background in planning, where you're familiar with both information technology and how cities are administered, or you come from a city itself and have the practical knowledge of what is realistic and practical. And I think we could structure then a set of chapters there around teaching by example. I'm not sure that there's a theoretical base in here yet. Maybe that'll emerge one day, but teach here by example. And then as we in the operations team this morning got into some discussion, there are many roles that play in here, some of them within the government, some of them outside the government. There are issues of organization. I didn't attempt to elaborate on that. And then there may be some professional bodies that can play in here. APA, I think, is fairly famous. City Protocol might not be as well known. This is a nascent organization. It was launched, or the beginnings of it were launched about 2 months ago in Barcelona. The CIO of the city of Barcelona had reached the conclusion that there is a void in here for certain kinds of standards, some technology standards, some process standards perhaps, and convened the industry, academics, other cities who are interested in that set of questions to come together and determine if there was an interest now to put together an organization His model for that organization is the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force. It's an interesting model. I'm not sure quite how strictly one could apply it. The IETF was operating in a different age. It was starting from a very blank piece of paper. But it did have some very, very good discipline and processes that could certainly be applied. So, I don't know, a couple hundred people came together for 2 days in July around that topic. Some of them have signed up as supporters, including some people from IBM. The next event will be in San Francisco in October, at which that initial body of people will come out with a kind of a straw man for what this organization might be and do and how it might work. That will be refined, and then I think in early next year, I seem to think February, March kind of time, the organization will be sort of formally launched, and this temporary organization that is at work at the moment will sort of go out of business. There's a word for it, I can't think what it is. So that's an organization that we may well wish to collaborate with very closely. It has great potential in developing standards, technical standards, and policy and process standards. Very, very ambitious, very challenging, but I think also quite inspirational in its own way. ICLEI, I think imagine many of you know ICLEI. The software that is widely used in local government. MISA is the Municipal Information Systems Association. Yeah, it's a Canadian organization, and IBM in Canada has worked very closely with them. Among other things, they have built a taxonomy of local government services. And I think probably some IBM people have taken part in that too. And it's a piece of work we think of quite highly. And some of you will know Bob Schloss, who may well be watching me as I speak here. Some of Bob's work on Scribe, I think, has its origins in MISA. And Scribe, by the way, is also something that it has been suggested that we might contribute that, IBM might contribute that to the city protocol system, for example. And then lastly, the Urban Systems Collaborative itself might conceivably be helpful one day in this space. And then not forgetting probably many other things, but I did list here then and outcomes as well. You know, why are we doing this and what benefits do we expect to see? All right, having rambled through that, I think maybe it would be good to see whether, A, you think there is some potential here, and B, if this is anything like the kind of structure for a book that one could imagine. Ken?
Most people don't know that architects, especially at Cal, study a variety of subjects. It's multidisciplinary, in addition to being an introduction to the profession. Yeah, this book idea is great. I think you're going to have to work really hard on attracting the readers to this, because it looks really technical. It looks technical, and you want to attract the general reader to it. And I'm just thinking an overarching thing that just occurred to me after listening to the presentation from the first group on the engagement. The ladder of citizen participation, that's basically the goal of democracies. And that's what this is supposed to do. And maybe that's got to be like the central focus in the introduction, is that this is a way of getting to that. And the two sides of it in the two workshops today were very good, because the first thought I always have about cities, of course I worked in one, is that you've got a city government that takes care of everything. Well, the social media has now made it easy for groups to get together and decide what they want to do outside of governance. So, but the overarching goal is to have citizens' participation in all endeavors in a city. And most of us live in cities, and a little bit of that placed at the front, that everybody's welcome to join. and maybe this would be instructional and informational, the book.
Thank you, Ken. Greg? It's great. I've got to meet so many new people in the last couple of days.
So I would say, building a little bit on some of the things that Nick talked about with the Jane Jacobs comment and this dynamism and complexity, part of what we were touching on was that things in terms of technology and the developing technologies and the way they're being used and peer-to-peer interactions, all these things are changing so quickly and are so dynamic that the traditional idea of a textbook, and maybe I'm not entirely sure if that's what you have in mind, may or may not be applicable in terms of staying up to speed with what's happening on a week-to-week, month-to-month, if not day-to-day basis out in the world. So I think, like everything else we should be thinking about in terms of rapid adaptation, maybe the quote-unquote textbook is a combination of printed materials or a traditional type of book, but also evolving online materials that, as you mentioned, are a bit case study based. So we talked a little bit about how the way the cross-pollination of new technologies, new applications, and how on an assignment basis, one could imagine that students are tomorrow come back with 2 examples of new applications or applications, put them together and come up with a 3rd new thing that is addressing a new problem. So that, to me, in terms of content of a textbook versus design of a curriculum for a learning process, is a very dynamic thing that is representative of what we're trying to get our hands on.
Thank you, Greg. Really excellent thoughts. So now we're into a different industry and the impact of new media on the publishing industry. So yes, I think maybe I'd mentioned to 1 or 2 other people yesterday, the idea of having at least part of this is developed and maintained as some kind of a wiki is certainly something I'd like to see explored. I think there's a lot of exploration that needs to be done here to determine exactly what the universities would actually want. I mean, do they want a sort of a practical cookbook kind of approach, or are they looking for something that's a little bit more theoretical? How deeply would you want to get into some of the sort of very lively issues around open data? Because it's a very I want to say frothy, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it's just a very bubbly, very active space that it certainly makes, it's certainly not suitable really for a printed textbook probably at this stage, and yet is clearly beginning to have an impact too. So it's, yeah, the design of this has got a lot of work ahead of it here. And I put this together just purely as a straw man to give us something to stare at and think about. And what I'd like to do, I think this is here, oh, okay, some target audience. These are some of the programs that I actually know about, or, programs that I know exist, or programs that people are beginning to talk about. It may go outside the MPA kind of space and spill over into how do we train engineers to think about this as they develop systems for cities. And clearly, my colleagues in IBM and Cisco and Esri also need education in this kind of space too. So what I have in mind is to solicit the urban systems community, so yourselves, the participants in this meeting, and the bigger list that we have, to see who's interested. I certainly have other colleagues in universities and companies that I think could be potentially useful contributors here, and then start in October to see who's actually willing to put some work into this. I if this is a book of some number of chapters, I imagine each chapter really is probably best part of a month's worth of work, at least, depending on how much research actually you need to do. So this is not a trivial thing, but I would like to, I do a lot of these kinds of collaborative team projects, and I very much like to see whether we could form a team. I'd like to see this as sort of a defining activity for the Urban Systems Collaborative. We began this activity, well, we began in October, really, of last year to sort of try and define what are the concrete things that we would do, apart from running a couple of conferences a year and some webinars. And I think this is now, we've understood what kind of community we are and what kind of problems we could try and help with. And this might be the first of a number of concrete activities. And then try and decide by the end of the year in discussions between that potential team and potential consumers of such a textbook and potential publishers of such a textbook, whether there is some genuine interest here, and then go into 2013 with some luck actually to produce such a work. So that's what I have in mind. Who knows what we'll actually get out of it. So this one we've looked at. Yeah, I've always thought that the journey was the reward, and I think the experience here is of being together for 2 days is the reward, much more than just the pure information that you've captured and shared. Thank you. This is the team that more or less put it together. I perhaps should have included Susan, who's certainly done the bulk of the real work in making the event happen. But this is the sort of the core team of the Urban Systems Group. It had occurred to me that we don't, Yuri and Mark, and we don't actually normally advertise those email addresses, so there isn't any way for people to come feedback. But anyway, there they are. They'll be on the website before too long, thanks to Yuri, I'm sure. So that's my sense of where we can go to from here, but I hope I'm not the only person in the room who's been thinking about that, and I'd like to invite anyone else to give comments on it. What do we, as a community, want to do next, in addition to thinking about a textbook? Stunned silence.
You had a question about should we have concrete examples in it, like, you know, so it's like a cookbook. You need both. You need the theory and the practice. That's what they're in business for. You know, we're all here to change the environment some way, right? So you've got to have concrete examples. That, you know, this technology is so new, and like the other fellow was mentioning, it's changing so quick, and it's hard to assess how we're doing. But boy, we got to start. As a group, you know, we're all well-intentioned people here, trying to make the environment better. And I want to clear something up. That ladder of citizen participation, we want to move everybody up that. We'll move everybody up that ladder. So those are our goals. Everybody wants to make the environment better. Now we all disagree on what that is. We have general agreement and some disagreement, and we'll find those out. But boy. We all agree that you've got a methodology here, and we participated in trying to create that on steps, but now we've got to fill it in with some concrete examples. And you've got the professionals here who are daily planning, and then you've got operations people. We can start putting it into these websites so we can kind of keep track of what progress has been made. But the book has got to have the theoretical background. It's got to have that first. And what we're trying to accomplish stated succinctly. And you know, that probably is not as much updatable. That's a little more concrete. We've gone through that here. But the examples need to be expanded, and they have to be convincing to other people, to the lay reader, to see this is worthwhile. I mean, these are obvious things. Just thought I'd state them.
Thank you, Ken. We Nicholas and I and Andreas, and I thought there was one other person. We attended a conference in Santa Fe back in July called Can There Be a Science of Cities, led by Jeff West and Luis Betancourt and Jose Bolo. and it's a really interesting question, and we could have spent a lot longer debating it than we did, although we had great fun doing that. But it certainly brought to my mind, and I've been trying to remember exactly who said this. It was some British, famous British scientist in the early 19th century, I think, or late 18th, early 20th century or late 19th century, who observed that all new science begins with stamp collecting. By which he meant that, you know, first of all, you have to go out and understand what it is you're trying to study. And, you know, and I think that's one of the things that we have done here today is to look at a lot of stamps. And from looking at them, you begin to abstract the theory. Pat?
So I think we have a good idea of, I guess, groups that we would have an affinity with in terms of our interest in making cities work better, or can there be a science of cities? And I don't know if there's enough, you know, wherewithal right now within the group in terms of numbers and capacity of the membership, but I think it's worth looking into and tracking the various standards that we can see even now, right, that we're going to need to grab hold of and elaborate upon to make this work. I'm thinking of like NIBS, National Institute of Building Sciences, the data structure that ICLEI is looking at now. I think it would all benefit from a cross-disciplinary viewpoint. A quick example in the NIBS world, and I'm a member of the NBIMS committee, is that it's a very limited viewpoint, and they're not looking at the entire life cycle in terms of the built infrastructure, the built environment. And so they're very, very focused on, I'm going to build a building, and I don't really care what happens after that. And that's not the view that we want to inculcate. That's not the view that we want to encourage. So I don't know, maybe that's something that we could start out immediately, because I think all of us in our various disciplines are aware of you know, standards, helpful standards for data structure that we're going to need to take hold of.
Thank you, Pat. Other thoughts? Jay?
So in the context of writing such a book, you know, also partly inspired by the keynote speaker earlier yesterday, one of the questions I was wondering about is whether it makes sense from an urban systems perspective to define a few quote-unquote moonshot kind of things that need to get done from an urban systems perspective, right? And such a thought exercise might sort of lead to thinking about what might be, you know, some of the urban phenomena, which I think the other group was referring to as being the natural processes which constrain the engineering of urban systems, and then the role that technology and information would play in it. Just a thought.
Thanks, John. You remind me that Yuri, in fact, one of the topics that we really ought to cover on the webinar is the city protocol. I don't know whether we've got that one signed up, but you know, there's at least a couple of people in IBM, and I think probably Esri and Cisco that could talk about that, because I think they may have eventually, you know, similar ambitions. They're just beginning to get themselves organized, but I would say they've probably got maybe a larger number of resources to play with than the Urban Systems Group has at the moment. Stan, did I see your hand up earlier on? No, okay. Any others? Everyone's worn out with talking and listening. Going. Gone. All right. It's winded up. I'm delighted with what we've been through in the last however many hours it is, 30 hours or so. We always, well, at least I always come into these kinds of events kind of nervous. What if you hold a party and nobody comes? And I think we've actually accomplished a huge amount of what I had hoped, a great deal more than I'd feared. And I thank you all very, very much for coming, for taking the time, giving your energy, your thoughts, and I hope continuing in the future. So thank you all very much.